How do you feel right now? Hopefully you're not terribly unhappy to be here. Probably you're curious as to what I'm going to talk to you about. Now consider how you feel physically. Take a moment to do a quick scan of your body from your head down to your toes, and just notice if anything feels a little uncomfortable. Maybe your back's a little sore from sitting. Maybe your shoulders are a little hunched up, or your knees are locked, or you're having trouble wiggling your toes inside your shoes. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, but just hold this information in your mind. And now, I'm going to have to ask you to take a moment to worry. Think about a major stressful time in your life, or just the daily stressors that you deal with on a regular basis. Maybe it's all the chores you have to do this weekend, or a high-stakes deadline that is looming. Maybe it's a decision or a conversation that you've been avoiding. Now, with that at the forefront of your mind, take a moment to scan your body once more, toes to head, head to toes, and notice if anything feels any different. Maybe there's a little more tension or discomfort. If that's the case, you've just experienced the startle pattern. There it is, the startle pattern, or what many people know as the fight or flight response. Now, a man named Frank Pierce Jones studied the startle pattern in detail and determined that it is remarkably similar across all mammals every time that it occurs. When we are nervous or spooked or stressed, the first thing that happens is that our head is thrust slightly backwards in relation to our spine. After that, the rest of the muscles in our body tighten up. Now, this prepares us to do the gross motor tasks that are fighting or running away. And it works very well if we are cave people running from a saber-toothed tiger. Unfortunately, in 21st century America, and indeed the modern world, it poses a couple of problems. To illustrate this, I'm a college student, and I get nervous when I have to write timed essays. If you've never had the privilege of writing a timed essay before, what happens is you walk into your classroom, paper and pen in hand, your professor hands you a question. You then have about an hour or so to answer it to the fullest extent that you can in that time. Now, when I get nervous for this, I go into the startle pattern, so my muscles tighten up. Unfortunately, though, I cannot fight my essay, nor can I flee from it and expect passable results. Indeed, I have to write the essay, and doing so is actually made more difficult because of my tight muscles. You can imagine my writing becomes more sloppy, and it also becomes slower, which makes it harder for me to communicate the ideas in my head. So we have this problem here that we get stressed, we go into the startle pattern, so our muscles tighten up, and we can't communicate. And the reason that we can't communicate is that fine motor tasks are how we communicate in our modern society. These, as we've already mentioned, include writing, but also visual arts, typing, music, dance, and STEM-based things such as computer programming and computer-aided design. Now, this problem is farther compounded because Jones also studied what he called the chronic startle pattern, which is basically the idea that in the modern world, there are people who are nervous and stressed, not just once in a while, but all of the time. This means that they're constantly walking around in the startle pattern with tight muscles. This means that they're constantly inhibited in their ability to do fine motor tasks, and it is constantly more difficult for them to communicate. This is something that I personally experienced 2 years ago. I'm a music education major here at Valparaiso University, and 2 years ago I was studying primarily keyboard, organ, and piano. I would practice for hours upon hours a day and feel that I wasn't making very many results or much progress. After a while, I noticed that my wrists began to burn and tingle from all of my practicing. A trip to the doctor informed me that I had carpal tunnel syndrome and tendinitis in my right wrist. Now, carpal tunnel and tendinitis are both repetitive strain injuries, which means they occur when stress or strain has been put on the muscles, tendons, and nerves of the body repeatedly. Now, this came as a bit of a shock to me because, of course, I hadn't intentionally hurt myself, let alone doing it over and over and over again, and I was left wondering what I had done so constantly and so almost consciously to myself to do this. So what I learned was that I had been in the chronic startle pattern. Basically, I was so nervous about all of the deadlines that I had to meet to play the piano, recitals, say, that I would get tense every time I went to practice. With tight muscles, I was unable to do the fine motor task that is playing the piano. So here I was, looking for a way to break the cycle. How could I maybe be a little stressed, but not go into the startle pattern so that my muscles wouldn't tighten up, so that I would still have the ability to communicate through my music? Now, one method that I learned about is called the Alexander technique. The Alexander technique is a method for changing habits that was developed in the 1900s by educator and actor F.M. Alexander. It is commonly used today by musicians, actors, and dancers, among others, who wish to increase their fine motor capabilities. Now, the Alexander technique suggests that the reason that we go into the chronic startle pattern is that people are willing to do things just any old way to accomplish a goal. He termed this end gaining. So the idea is we're just rushing willy-nilly to get to that end point instead of focusing on how we get there. An example of this might be if I had a report to do on the computer. My temptation might be to sit down, begin typing as fast as I can, and not stop until it's done. Unfortunately, that can cause the problem of the startle pattern. So Alexander suggested another option, which he called the means whereby. Now, the means whereby essentially means breaking up our end goal into smaller chunks, for one thing. And this eliminates the startle pattern in the sense that we are less nervous for the end goal because we see how we can reach it through these smaller steps. So that's thing one. The other thing that the means whereby suggests is that we are constantly checking in with ourselves, physically asking ourselves how we're feeling as we do a task. So if I were trying to write a paper, I would use the first part of the means whereby to break it into smaller chunks. I might write one page and then go take a walk around. The second part, though, is making sure that my computer typing is healthy, that I'm sitting in a way that is not uncomfortable to me. As I've been working through my tension and my tight muscles, I've learned that it doesn't feel good to have tight shoulders or arms all of the time. And so by reminding myself that when I don't feel comfortable, I should take a break and make sure that I can regain a sense of comfort, breaks the startle pattern because it makes us feel less nervous. Even if I am nervous, it gives me a chance to sort of come back and say, okay, let's find a neutral, more healthy position. Now, obviously, I was asked here today to speak to you about conversations that inspire action. Why not today? And some of you are probably wondering what this has to do with it all. Well, you can change your approach and your actions today and inspire others to do the same. We have seen that the startle pattern inhibits people's ability to communicate. Imagine how different our society would be if everyone could communicate the ideas in their heads, in their heads and in their hearts. Though, don't get too caught up on what might be. Alexander would call that end gaining. Instead, focus on what can be. You can change your own habits today and inspire others to do the same. Imagine the potential for dialogue that would exist if everyone could communicate. Thank you.